Hello, and welcome to another edition of Positively Incorrect TV. I'm Scott Cluthe with Phonoscope New Media. What's the biggest health challenge facing us? Cancer? Obesity? Here's a statistic you might not have known about, but is coming like a tidal wave as we live longer and longer lives. When two people both reach 80 years of age, one of them has dementia. What is dementia? The Mayo Clinic states dementia isn't a specific disease. Instead, dementia describes a group of symptoms affecting intellectual and social abilities severely enough to interfere with daily functioning. And many causes of dementia symptoms exist. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of a progressive dementia. Well, that's a definition. But the reality of having dementia, and just as important, living or working as a care provider with someone exhibiting dementia, is much more complex than a simple definition as a guide on what to do, how to do it, and why often families and facilities are at a loss to grasp what is happening inside the people exhibiting its many faces. Today, I talk with Laura Wayman, known nationally as the Dementia Whisperer. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Scott.
It's great to have you here. Laura Wayman holds an associate in arts degree in gerontology and is a certified social services designee. Did I say that right?
It was close.
Thank you. I'm working it. She has over a decade of experience and a strong dedication to quality aging. She is the CEO of the Dementia Whisperer's Caregiver Education and Support and author of A Loving Approach to Dementia Care, published by Johns Hopkins University Press. Laura, how big of an issue is the dementia crisis? Am I overstating it?
Oh, I wish you were, Scott. That it is a huge silent pandemic. And because of the social stigma, no one wants to talk about dementia. It is expanding at a rate that is difficult for us to comprehend. I am always amazed that everywhere I go, everyone is being touched by dementia in their life, friends, neighbors, loved ones, spouses. It is just running rampant, and it is the most horrific medical situation of our time.
You know, we're going to talk later about the effect on the caregivers, but let's talk about the dementia as it's known. Over 70 different conditions and growing, I guess, fall under this umbrella called dementia. Now, most people hear dementia, they think Alzheimer's. What is Alzheimer's to dementia, and how does that fit in that domain?
Well, just as if you had the flu, Scott, the flu is an illness and causes you to have symptoms such as cough, fever, chills. Dementia is that list of symptoms that must have a cause where loss of function, normal function, is happening in the brain, and Alzheimer's is a disease that causes that loss of function.
I see.
And then you present dementia, which is the symptoms such as confusion, disorientation, loss of short-term memory, an inability to process information in a normal fashion like you would before that devastation started to happen in our brain.
Now, dementia, as we talked about, is a growing crisis, but it's been around forever. Has it been labeled or mislabeled in the past? How has the last decade of our knowledge or information helped to grow what it is really we're dealing with?
Well, because we're living longer and the risk for having some kind of dementia goes up extremely as we age. For example, what you had talked about earlier, if you reach the wonderful age of 80, you have a 50% chance of having some form of dementia.
That's incredible.
Now, we're living longer, so we're going to see that affect us as we age.
We're going to be back with more. When we return, Laura Wayman shares the story of how she got involved and really became the Dementia Whisperer. You're watching Positively Incorrect with your host, Scott Cluthe. Today, dementia, discovering a loving approach with Laura Wayman. And you can find and reach Laura, find out so much more at her website, laurawayman.com. By the way, don't forget to visit the Phonoscope New Media website, phonoscopenewmedia.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Positively Incorrect TV. This is Scott Cluthe. My guest today, the Dementia Whisperer, Laura Wayman, author of the book by the same name. Hello again, Laura.
Thank you, Scott. It's nice to be here.
It is great to have you here. This is critical information, and there's so much more. We really can't share it all in just a short TV show. But I want to know what brought Laura Wayman into dementia as the Dementia Whisperer. You have a story that opens your book about a lady named Peggy. Tell us that story.
I want to share the story of Peggy when she was very young. She was shy. She was 17 years old. She went to a square dance with her girlfriends. She took one look at the square dance caller that night, who was also a young man. She turned to her friends and said, "That man's so handsome, I'm going to marry that man." And you know, they married. They had a wonderful life together. They raised 5 children. And during that time, Scott, Peggy realized that she was a true caregiver at heart, and she began to take in even foster children that needed a lot of care, had physical challenges. And her beloved Jack, he worked hard, and as they began to get older in their life and their kids were getting close to being raised, they began to talk about what they wanted to do in retirement. And so they wanted to sell their house, buy an RV, and travel around the country.
Great idea.
Absolutely. Fate was kind. And when Jack was able to retire, the kids were out of the house, they got that RV, and they traveled. They got to experience that in their retirement. But after 15 years, Jack's health began to fail. He got macular degeneration, could no longer drive, and he began to show those signs and symptoms of dementia. Peggy, being that caregiver at heart, knew she needed to change their lifestyle. She took him to their physician. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And they changed the whole way they were living so that Peggy could be that 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week caregiver and effectively care for him. And their life changed dramatically, and the family began to hear uncharacteristic complaints from Peggy as they were more or less isolated in this little town where they bought a home to care for Jack. She was saying how difficult it was, that it was much more difficult than she expected, even though she had cared for other folks in different physical challenges. But he was incontinent, so her day was all about bodily fluids. And she couldn't even have a moment to use the restroom because she couldn't close the door. She had to keep her eye on him all the time because he would wander. And there were times when he did not even remember who she was. So it was very, very challenging. Well, one night, she sat down to have dinner with Jack. She always made him a wonderful dinner. They were alone in the home, of course, and she suffered a massive heart attack. Now, Jack's dementia was so far advanced, he didn't know how to help her. He didn't know what she needed. He eventually went over next door to some friends of theirs, knocked on the door and said, "Peggy's very tired. She's sleeping on the floor." By the time help arrived, Peggy was gone. And Scott, Peggy was my mother.
Yeah,
that's why I'm
that's a
sitting.
hard story to even listen to.
That's why I'm sitting in front of you today.
Yeah.
Because had I known what I share with caregivers now, to help them with an awareness of how they must take care of themselves on this difficult road, they too will pay that ultimate toll. 68% of the time, that caregiver goes first because this is so stressful for them. Their entire life is turned upside down.
So almost 2/3 of the time, the caregiver passes before the so-called patient with dementia, whatever it might be. That's something to think about. We're going to talk more about that. My guest is Laura Wayman. You're watching Positively Incorrect with Scott Cluthe. Today, dementia, discovering a loving approach with Laura Wayman, as she just shared that very personal story. You can reach Laura and find out more at her website, laurawayman.com. Don't forget to visit the Phonoscope New Media website, phonoscopenewmedia.com. We'll be right back. Stay with us, won't you? This is Scott Cluthe with Positively Incorrect TV. Today we focus on dementia. In this part, I try to understand just what is actually going on inside the minds of those in the dementia world. My guest today, the Dementia Whisperer, Laura Wayman, author of the book by the same name. Laura, what has your work over the years really taught you about the world of the dementia person? What's going on in their reality?
Well, what I have observed over the years working with thousands of those with dementia and those that are caring for them is that perception from the person who is diagnosed with any form of dementia begins to change. Their reality becomes very different because of the loss of normal function in their brain. And so when we approach them and communicate with them, we must understand that their perception and reality is very different, and they are frightened when we try and bring them into our reality.
Really, literally frightened many times.
It frightens them. That's when we see that anxiety, that aggression, that combativeness, that resistance to care, because their brain is broken and cannot function normally in our reality and our world. And what is so difficult is dementia is insidious, and this is so challenging for that caregiver as well, is it appears and it disappears, and it appears and it disappears. And that caregiver will say to me, well, Mom, it was fine yesterday, but today she's really experiencing a dementia wonderland like never before. And I like to explain it like our brain, when it is being ravaged by dementia, begins to look like a piece of Swiss cheese. There's random holes in random cheese. And that person who has that diagnosis goes to function normally, access a function from their brain like they've done all their life, and it is a roll of the dice whether there's going to be cheese or a hole. And then they compensate when there's not brain matter there, that brain matter's been taken from them.
They fill the hole?
They fill the hole with the behaviors and communicate with us by their behaviors, because that they're compensating for that loss. And we as caregivers then need to understand that we can't change those behaviors because they have no control. And they themselves, that person with dementia, doesn't feel any different. They don't know that they are behaving differently. So we can't change it. We can only manage it and help guide them through that lack of normal function, so that they're not frightened or paranoid or anxious.
You know, Laura, I'd imagine that a lot of, especially the kids, the parents, children, who are trying, many times mostly for economic reasons, because they feel they have no choice, to be that caregiver, to see how long they can stand up and do it, that because they don't have the kind of knowledge base you're sharing, start to make assumptions about what's going on. Make assumptions that my father, I didn't think he hated me, because they're acting out. Start to make assumptions about he doesn't want to be with me. He doesn't appreciate who I am. I bet that's a very common occurrence.
That's very common, and they can't expect that person to exist as they did before the dementia. They have to let go of that, and it's a loss for themselves as a caregiver. They must grieve that. It is extremely painful because it's incremental small losses all the time.
So it adds up to,
it does.
Yeah, to
all
a greater
unresolved.
loss. Wow. We're going to share so much more when we come back with Laura Wayman, the Dementia Whisperer, after this break here on Positively Incorrect TV with your host, Scott Cluthe. And remind you of her website, laurawayman.com, simple as that. And connect, by the way, if your company or business enterprise needs high-quality creative media, check out our Phonoscope New Media.com website for broadcast, webcast, corporate communications, so much more. We'll be right back, so don't go anywhere, okay?